So we're very happy to have with us. Again, this is a return appearance from when we were in person last February of Paul Wilson, who's the Senior Vice President of Olympic Sales at NBCUniversal. And he was a director of NBC Sports Sales prior to that. And he's got a level of knowledge about Olympics that is, in my mind, close to being unsurpassed. And a longtime colleague of mine, to the benefit of the businesses that we worked on, Paul Bamundo, who's the Senior VP and Head of Business Development and Marketing Partnerships at Laurel Road. He was CMO at the Ivy League Sports Marketing Group, and he did global sponsorships, as I said, at the Sandwich folks up in Connecticut. So, gentlemen, I know we're on a little bit of a clock here today. We're talking about both the Olympics and the Paralympics. And Paul, I guess I'll put you on the docket first and say, how the heck are you going to sell Summer Olympics in Tokyo in July, Winter Olympics in Beijing in February of 2022, and in between you've got Paralympics going on. And oh, by the way, you also have the Super Bowl next year, although I think that you've kind of dodged the bullet that you personally don't have to do that. So talk to us about NBC's approach to having everything kind of queued up right on top of one another over the next year or less.
Tony, and thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I mean, it's wonderful, isn't it, when you think about the number of outstanding opportunities that are available or will be available to NBC next year, because in addition to the Tokyo Games that will take place in July and the Beijing Games that will take place in February, the Super Bowl, which will be right in between the Beijing Games. Don't forget, we also have the Spanish-speaking World Cup, which will be in November of 22. So we're calling it a once-in-a-lifetime kind of opportunity where we have these four massive platforms that are going to be taking place within a very short period of time, all on the same network. So it's a daunting kind of task at hand, but it's one that we definitely see the opportunity that it presents to us, and we're really looking forward to the discussions that we've been having with a lot of clients.
So you and I have talked many times over the years about how there is almost a clock that you can set to some period of time prior to the Olympics happening. Something is going to come up that people say is going to cancel the Olympics. So last year it actually did happen. And, you know, when we were together in February, we didn't think it was going to happen at that point, but I don't think any of us knew the extent of the pandemic. But this year, even with everybody saying it's going to happen, and even with the examples of other sports being able to conduct their competitions, there still was an article that got out a while back. Would you want to talk to us about that circumstance and what the current best information is?
Sure. The best information that we have to share with you is, and the IOC has been very vocal in kind of and transparent in what is going to be happening with the Tokyo Games. The question is not whether or not the games are going to occur. The question is, how are the games going to occur? Because the games will occur. They've come out and said that if the Tokyo Games would need to be postponed again, the Tokyo Games would just not occur, simply because of the proximity to the Beijing Games, and they're not pushing back or changing the time frame for the Winter Games. The only question that remains right now is the availability of having fans in the stands and to what level that fan engagement will be in the stands. But as far as NBC and all of the rights holders are proceeding, is as these games will occur, and they are going to occur on time, being July 23rd, 2021. You've heard the most recently this week, the leaders at the G7. You have 7 national leaders talking about the need for the Olympic movement. If there has ever been a time for there to be an Olympic Games, I think this time is the most critical, because when you think about how this world has basically been in hibernation. And this is going to be a coming out party where the world will come together. It's something that I think is going to be enjoyed and rejoiced by basically everyone. So we're very excited about, the games occurring on Friday, the 23rd of 2021.
So we've had a number of conversations with folks in and around MASB, and I think I should credit my terrific colleague Frank Finley for this. The opening ceremonies, in some ways, are going to be kind of the reopening ceremonies for the world, right? And it's got that potential, of course. That's a positive and optimistic view, but we tend to be that way. You are doing something a little different this year in terms of how you're treating the broadcast of the opening ceremonies. Why don't you share that with everybody?
Yeah, because I think everybody realizes that the opening ceremonies are going to be that point in time where it's like we're celebrating we've made it through this pandemic. So what NBC is going to do, based on the time difference between East Coast and Tokyo is 13 hours ahead of the East Coast. The opening ceremonies will begin at 8 p.m. Tokyo time on Friday. What we are going to do, which we have never done before, is we are going to air the opening ceremonies on the network of NBC as it is occurring at 7 a.m. in the morning. And we are going to make a celebration of that day that's going to kind of last the entire length of the day. Historically, we would always tape delay the opening ceremonies for the primetime telecast. What we're going to do now is we're going to run the opening ceremonies as they are happening live from 7 to 11 in the morning. And then we are going to have a special Today show, which is going to come from Tokyo, that will begin at 11 o'clock in the morning, that will run 11 to 1, where we're going to be bringing in athletes in and out of the Today show in that telecast. Then what we're going to do is start showing competition coverage that will be happening at 1 o'clock in the afternoon because the cauldron has already been lit. So we will run competition coverage from 1 to 4. And then that night in prime time, we will run a modified version of the opening ceremonies where we will kind of make it more of an entertainment style type program of what everybody is accustomed to seeing. So we're taking what used to be just a short window of time for the opening ceremonies, and we're going to celebrate the entire day on the NBC network.
So if I can ask a question of Paul on this to put you on the hypothetical seat. So we used to spend a lot of time talking about where we wanted to be in the opening ceremonies, and adjacency to the U.S. team was always a good place to be. So if the opening ceremonies are happening at 7 a.m., would Laurel Hill, or would you advise somebody in the space to be in opening ceremonies in the morning?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Tony. It's good to see you, Paul, again. I hope we could all see each other in person. I'm wearing my shirt that I got in Sochi when I was with you guys, so I figured it was a good mojo to have for us for today. Yes. Tony, I would say yes. I mean, I think I agree with Paul wholeheartedly. I'm a huge Olympics fan, first and foremost, and as a marketer, I think you would want to be there, and I think you would want to be there really, everywhere you can throughout the day. So in the live broadcast in the morning, I know you and I always would talk about with our colleague Carrie Ford, who I know is coming up later and tuning in, that we would want to be there for even the tape broadcast, because no one packages it better than NBC and how they do it. So actually to have the ability to probably be in both, and I know we've talked about the different rings rights holders and the folks who would be there. To me, I think having a presence in and around the live broadcast, and then frankly for the tape later, would be smart and kind of bookending it that day.
Yeah, I was not trying to tweak it, because I think it's definitely a place that you want to be, and I know, given the way that NBC promotes the Olympics, you'll probably have a much bigger audience than one might normally expect at that day part in time. People will set their alarms.
What's important, Tony, to note is that we had already been very far down our sales road prior to the announcement that the opening ceremonies that we were going to broadcast it live at 7:00. So we are not looking to monetize this in the traditional way. So every advertiser who is involved in the opening ceremonies in prime time, we are giving them the same amount of time that they have in that primetime show in the live show at 7 p.m. And we are going to aggregate that number. So we want our sponsors to enjoy the celebration that's going to be taking place. And we wanted to make sure that everybody could take part in it. So people are going to be running in both.
One thing I just wanted to mention too, because it happened to come up today in a conversation. I mean, I'm old enough to remember, and I know probably many people in the audience are, but for the younger people, the 1980 Olympic hockey team, that wasn't broadcast live, right? I mean, to think about that, how much has changed in the world, that was on tape delay. It's incredible, right? And you come to this point where, NBC is right on top of it and doing something where they're having live at 7 a.m. opening ceremonies and broadcasting on all their different networks and media platforms throughout the day. I mean, that's just an incredible thing to think about. One of the most iconic sporting events in generations wasn't even live.
But it got a pretty good rating that night.
It did.
Yeah.
There wasn't social media to ruin what happened, right? Because it was only a couple hours later.
So, Paul, one of the big new sponsors that's been brought on board for the Olympics is Toyota. And, the auto category always has a disproportionate influence given its size and scope in terms of what marketers do. What can you talk about in terms of Toyota becoming a sponsor of the Olympics and making a very prominent commitment to the games?
Yeah, Toyota, became a top sponsor, which means they have global rights. They are an IOC sponsor, and they are a sponsor of the Olympics and Paralympic Games. And Toyota basically used the Pyeongchang Games, which was their first games as a top sponsor, to relaunch the company. If you ask the folks in Plano, Texas, Toyota does not want to be considered, an automobile company. Toyota wants to be considered a mobility company. They are doing everything that they can to allow people of every stature to have mobility. And they are behind the Paralympics movement and quite frankly are the leader in pushing the Paralympic movement to different levels. And while we applaud everything that they're doing in regards to the Paralympics, because as we own the exclusive rights to the Olympic Games, we also are the exclusive provider of the Paralympic Games. And it's one of the platforms which we feel as a company, and me personally feel, that the Paralympics does not get the amount of attention that it warrants. I mean, when you think about the Olympic Games and you see these individual athletes and you see the accomplishments that they've overcome to be at the highlight of their career at that one specific moment in time, and then you see the Paralympic stories and the challenges that these individuals have overcome, and how nothing, absolutely nothing, gets them down, and how they just pursue greatness and perfection to the best that they can based off of what they are given with. It really is a remarkable thing. And it's something that I know that NBC is going to continue to try to build the exposure out of the Paralympic movement as we move forward.
Well, in that regard, even though it was on another network, it must have been great seeing the Toyota Paralympic spot in the Super Bowl, right? I mean, that was one of the most talked about ads in terms of everything that I saw after that game, right?
It absolutely was, and I jumped on a little bit earlier, and I heard Norris mention it. I mean, that Jessica Long story, we had seen that spot from Toyota a while back, and we were not aware that they were going to use it in the Super Bowl. But quite frankly, we knew that when they told us that. I had said to the folks, at the time it was to Ed Laukus, that this is going to be one of the highest marks spots that are going to run in the Super Bowl, simply because of the content and what it meant and the storytelling of what was behind it, and it was. So it was fantastic to see that.
I think, just from my perspective too, I think they're really getting it right. I know I talked to you guys about this the other day. they were a client of mine when I was at the NBA, and at that time, they were wanting to be seen as, you know, a global company, but also a company in the U.S. that was really getting in touch with the community. And I think that's what led to this point. Paul, as you're talking about them embracing the Paralympic Games, I think it's a fantastic thing that they're doing. As you and I have talked about before, I think it's a platform that more brands should take advantage of. I worked at a startup back in 2000. We Media was a company for people with disabilities, and we did the first live webcast of a Olympics Games, and it was of the Paralympics at the time. And so I think it's now here again, 20 years later, that brands are coming around to understanding that that's such a great platform to take advantage of. And it really is the best that you could offer in sports and in the human condition.
Absolutely.
Well, one of the things that you face as a marketer when you're looking at a property like the Olympics is it's kind of daunting given the set of other marketers that are going to be there. I know that you at NBC have got kind of a research-based approach to giving people an early look at how their spots might perform, and you've done that in the NFL, I believe, and I know that you're doing it now in the Olympics. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and the measurements that can come out of it to provide marketers with some insight?
Yeah, when we had the Super Bowl in 2018, you know, every 3 years, we wanted to help a lot of advertisers because the creative was so important. And you guys were talking about it a little bit earlier in the Super Bowl, the effectiveness of your ads. And people go into the Super Bowl for different reasons, whether or not they want to score well on the ad meter, whether or not they want to introduce a new product, whether or not they're working on their brand perception. And what we had done was we had gone back and we had put together what we called the ad engine and looked at different pieces of creative. And if you wanted to achieve certain kind of objectives, we kind of suggested what that creative should entail. What we have done now is we've entered into marketplace and we call it our Olympic ad engine. And what the Olympic ad engine does is it takes a look at the legacy of which we've been involved with the Olympic movement and the number of commercials that we have aired, where we do testing on basically every spot that runs. And we looked at the people coming into the games that were trying to accomplish one of five things, whether or not they were trying to highlight awareness, whether or not they were trying to have their ads break through, whether or not they were working on their brand perception, whether or not they wanted to have brand engagement, right? They wanted people involved or socially talking about their spot, or whether or not they were just looking for search, for people to search them out and understand them. And what we did was we scanned the last two games, over 900 pieces of creative, and we captured what components were involved in each commercial that scored well in each one of those kind of platforms. And we broke it down and put it into an engine, as we call it, where we can now take from the very basic storyline or even just a script of a potential commercial, run it through this ad engine and be able to kind of spit out what we feel should be adjusted to the spot, what it is that the spot would accomplish, and kind of work very closely with our potential sponsors as how do we make that ad the most effective. And it's just not on NBC. We use a lot of third-party research. You know, we use Phoenix MI, we use EDO, we use iSpot. So there's a lot of third-party companies that we tap into that help that model work out. So it's been well received, and a lot of our clients are utilizing it so that their commercials inside, their announcements inside the games are the most effective that they possibly can be. Oh, I just lost you. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sorry.
I think it's important to kind of state that this is pre-production testing.
Pre-production testing, but we could also do it on post spots. We could also do it. You know, I heard your guys talk a little bit earlier. I think it was Norris that said that you need new creative if you're going to run in the Super Bowl because maybe that didn't pan out. we have found that in the Olympics, that you don't necessarily need new creative. You want to stay true to your brand. And if your creative is that same tonality of what the Olympic movement is all about, right? Bringing people together, excellence in sport, excellence in whatever the topic happens to be. If the tonality is correct with that, then it scores well. What we found is that a lot of times ads that are a negative ad, an attack on a competitor or a negative attack, then they don't really fare as well inside the Olympics, because quite frankly, when you think about it, people are coming to the Olympics to be lifted. They want it. They want to be inspired. They want to celebrate something. And that's why we feel that the Olympic movement is like no other movement that's out there.
So, Paul, one of the things that we often talked about was the great dynamic of group viewing around the Olympics, right? With everybody having their own screen, the whole notion that you can have a family or a group together viewing something doesn't happen all that often. Why don't you talk a little bit about the benefits that we've seen about group viewing with the Olympics?
Co-viewing is massive, really. You know, I've said it quite often that unfortunately, and I work for a television network, the Olympics are the last bastion of all family viewing. I mean, when you think about your own viewing habits, and I often say this in rooms, when you think about when you watch the Olympics, it's not a property that you watch in isolation. If you have children, you are watching this with your children. If you have a spouse, you're watching with a spouse. And if you're not married, or you're watching it with your community, because you're completely engaged in what's happening. You're being introduced to individuals that you might not have ever heard of before. And as far as a parent goes, you're using those examples to talk to your children about, look what life is capable of delivering for you, and look at these accomplishments that anyone can make. And while we've often said that, you know, I've often said that in the Olympic world, it's amazing that these individuals, these are your next door neighbors. You know, this Paul Bamundo could be my next door neighbor, and yet here he is on the greatest stage, accomplishing something that no other human can do. And who wouldn't want to inspire to do that?
So Paul Bamundo, one of your big competitors, put their name on a fancy Dan $5 billion stadium in Inglewood, California, by LAX. Are you expecting them to be prominent in things like the Olympics going forward, or did they use all their funds on that naming rights deal?
Well, time will tell, right? One would think that if they're going to make a big bet like that, then you double down and you try and take advantage of it. I know with the Super Bowl being there next year, it would probably make sense for them to kind of take advantage of their name being out there. They fundamentally have a different strategy than we do. I often use the example that we used to talk about, Tony, a lot with McDonald's and Subway, our former employer. I often say that they're the McDonald's to us as the Subway, and they're going after the mass, and we're trying to be a little more strategic, right? So if I'm them, I would think that would be something that they would probably think about doing, is further leveraging with whatever budget they have left, what they can do now that they've got that naming rights.
So, Paul Wilson, I know we talked a little bit about ratings, and you know, every Olympics you'd come out and you guys would have really good estimates, and you know, you'd often actually exceed those estimates in our experience. Given all of the at least the headlines about audience size, even in sports last year, granted the calendar was different in terms of the timing of the championships, at least in you know, basketball and in hockey. How are you dealing with projected ratings for the games this summer?
Well, the way that you know, we know that people's viewing habits have changed radically, right? And the way that NBC programs the games has also changed radically. It used to be that we would save the biggest sports for prime time. We would shut down everything. And if you wanted to watch gymnastics or you wanted to watch swimming, you had to come to the mothership and you had to watch it in prime time, and you had that massive rating. We know that that's not how people want to be served, right? NBC owns the exclusive rights to the Olympics until 2032. It's more important that we continue to keep the movement of the Olympic at a high, as of interest to everyone. So how do we program the games so that it is accessible to everyone when they want to watch it on the platforms of which they want to watch it? So we have adjusted in how we how we sell our inventory, so to say, in the games. That when someone buys a unit in prime time on the mothership, we may have 5 other networks that are also broadcasting other Olympic content at the same time. The Golf Channel may be airing some golf. USA may be showing some beach volleyball. MSNBC may be showing a Team USA soccer match. So we have all of these things. The way that we've done it is that when an advertiser buys 1 unit on the network, every other one of our platforms that happens to be broadcasting Olympics within that same window of time, they will receive a unit in all of those. We are aggregating these audiences. We are bringing them all together. And what we're doing is we're allowing advertisers to run different pieces of creative on different networks. So you may have a piece of creative that you may want to run, like if we use Subway as an example, where you had Michael Phelps and you want that piece of creative to run around swimming, but then you may have another piece of creative around a track star that you may want it there, so you can run that on a different network. And then you aggregate that audience together. And that's kind of like the focus on how we've been doing it. And it's been working. So I know that while traditional ratings have fallen, what I have been out in the marketplace saying, and this is a bold statement, is that these Tokyo Games will be the most watched event in the history of media, period. These games, the number one media event to date right now are the London Games. Completely tape delayed, Paul, by the way, right? Completely tape delayed, but it had the highest viewership. We're anticipating that we will have 221 million Americans consuming the games on the linear platforms only for the Tokyo Games because of this. So we're very excited about and bullish about what we think the ratings are. And to back that up, Tony, which is the big thing, every advertiser who has ever advertised in the Olympic Games to date has delivered in the Olympic Games. And it's something that we take great pride in.
So for those of us that used to use ratings, that's basically a 66 rating because you're reaching 2/3 of the population, right? I mean, it's that kind of number to the conversation we were having earlier. So I think we're running a little bit long, but perhaps, Frank, if we have any questions out there, we could answer 1 or 2.
Yeah, so we have Mike Donahue has his hands raised. Why don't we go to him? Hi, Mike.
Okay, hi. A question about the 2 fastest growing population cohorts, millennials and Generation Z. And I call Generation Z screenagers because they're the first ones to grow up with nothing but screens in front of them. Those 2 generations, I think, are less interested in television than the older generations. But what is NBC doing to try to make it attractive for the millennials and especially the screenagers to tune in? I mean, are you using things like influencer marketing, because those 2 generations are the biggest users of influencer marketing? And then anything about what NBC is doing in the area of purpose branding? Those 2 things are really important to millennials and screenagers. And is there a way that you can increase the audience among those groups by doing things like that?
Yeah, Michael, that's a great question, and it is something that we pay a lot of attention to at NBC, because we have to continue to keep that next generation of viewer excited about the Olympic movement. So, we applaud what the IOC is doing to keep, the sports kind of relevant to that millennial, as you mentioned, right? So the fact that we have skateboarding in the games, the fact that we have rock climbing, which is going to be a new sport coming into these games, the fact that we have surfing, which is coming into the Tokyo Games. So we're excited about these new sports that are coming. What we are also doing is we know that, yes, these millennials are not necessarily watching traditional networks. So we have gone out and had partnerships with a lot of third-party companies like Twitter, like Snap, like recently Twitch, where we are controlling the Olympic content that we are putting on those platforms, yet we are controlling the sale of the Olympic content on those platforms. We do it for a couple of purposes. We control the sale, one, to protect our exclusivities, and also two, to protect the environment which the Olympics are living in. So we're constantly looking for new third-party programs or platforms, these different apps that people are using, and we're capitalizing on those. In the Pyeongchang Games, for instance, we put our content on Peloton. We put our content in Uber vehicles in the Pyeongchang Games because we're trying to reach people at every age on the platforms of which they're engaging at that time. And on your purpose-driven platforms, we know how important and critical that is. And you see that in a lot of the promotion of which we are doing with the games. We realize that millennials want to associate themselves with brands that have purpose. And it's one of the things that we talk to a lot of our companies, our sponsors, about, so that they can have a purpose and they're focusing on whatever that purpose-driven platform is that is most relevant to their business. And then we are looking to how we can kind of expand that into our enhancements of which we create for those sponsors.
Yeah, and Tony's friend Mark Pritchard leans in hard at Procter because they're all a big Olympic sponsor and they definitely care about purpose branding. Yes, go ahead.
Well, one thing I just wanted to add was just back when Tony and I were doing this, and Paul mentioned Michael Phelps. I mean, one of the things that we would think about was not just their sort of appeal on their athletic fields, and in his case in the pool, but also their social media following. We literally would look at that and say, how many people do they reach too? So then when we're working with them, when they're in our advertising, when Michael Phelps, when we had a standee of him in every one of our restaurants, and close to 40,000 restaurants in the world, we knew that this was someone, as well as the other people that we work with too, that had a large social media following, and the things that they would be saying would be representative of us too. So it's very much, I think, on the mind of marketers and Olympic marketers too, the following that people have themselves, especially for the millennials that follow them.
We had to get a lot of those standees done because teenage girls kept stealing them. Any other questions that we have, Frank?
Yeah, we do have a couple. One is from Kevin Richardson. He's asking about the time zones across the United States and the viewership impact of them, specifically what's being done for the Mountain, the Central, and the Pacific time zones to bring them into the fold.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And Kevin, what we're doing is we are going off pattern at NBC when we broadcast the games. So basically what that means is, as we show the games occurring, because when you think about it, with the time difference of being 13 hours ahead on East Coast, so when it is 10 a.m. on Tuesday morning, that means it is 9 p.m. in New York on Monday night. What we're doing is we are broadcasting in pattern across the entire country. So when we come on the air at 8 p.m. in New York, we are coming on the air at 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific. So our primetime show is running simultaneously across the country at that same time. We know that with social media, everything gets out. And even if people don't want to know the results of certain things, they find out about it. So that's why we're broadcasting simultaneously across the country on the network.
And Joanna Sen actually asked a question at the end of the previous one, but I think it's a really good one for this one as well. which is for which industries do Super Bowl ads, and maybe we say Olympic ads, and maybe we can say, you know, mega event ads, create the most value for their brands. So what particular industry, or maybe even broader, what makes for this to be a good opportunity for a brand?
Well, I'll lob something in, then you guys can agree or disagree. They create the most value for whoever's category is not well represented, right? So, you know, it was interesting to me looking at the Super Bowl. Pepsi sponsored the halftime show. Pepsi had The Weeknd and his incredibly catchy song running in commercials for at least 4 or 5 weeks leading into the Super Bowl. And, you know, Coke chose not to be there this year, right? So there's nothing like being in a place where your competitor's not, and you have the chance to be there very, very visibly, which kind of gets back a little bit to the conversation we were having about the beer category and Budweiser, at least in the New York market, having both Sam Adams and Corona there this year, whereas they kind of had the run of show, if you will, to themselves. A lot of people in these kind of events, you know, people who don't have a whole lot of marketing experience in a lot of circumstances say, you know, let's go be in the Super Bowl because we can reach a lot of people. That's a good thing, especially if you're trying to launch a brand. But, you know, I think back to the .com days when Outpost.com was, you know, firing small animals at Targets or whatever. It's not just being there that actually works. It's actually having a coherent strategy that is part of a longer term plan, which is why I think I know Paul Bamundo and I would have been pulling our hair out having Olympics in Tokyo in July, and then having Olympics in Beijing, Winter Olympics next February. But at the same time, it's a great opportunity because you can differentiate yourself from the pack. And I think that's, you know, if your competitors are not there because it's a high out-of-pocket cost, or it's a significant undertaking to make sure that you have the materials to do it properly, you know, if you're the one that's there, I think you benefit greatly compared to the competitive set.
And the opportunity to break through. I mean, Tony, you and I both know, and Paul, you referenced this the other day when we spoke, it was the time for us to do something with Michael Phelps. But interestingly, we did it in the Winter Games in Vancouver when we broke new creative there. So, you know, that was something that we were able to do on a big event and actually focus on a summer athlete, but a summer athlete that we felt that was transcendent of the Olympic movement overall to be in a Winter Games spot. So,
yeah, Paul Wilson got my juices flowing by saying I could run a Michael Phelps spot next to the swimming. Given all the Olympic rules. Paul Wilson, do you have any thoughts on who succeeds the most? You probably have the best purview on that.
Listen, I think that what we have found out is that because of the mass scale of the audience to which the Olympics can deliver, we have found that the property, believe it or not, can deliver on every different KPI that one's thinking about. We have seen it work for companies who were in a PR nightmare utilizing the Olympics and pull them right out of that. We have seen it for companies that are launching a new brand that they've never launched before. We have numerous success stories that talk about how that can enter into a marketplace, and all of a sudden your word of mouth and your awareness levels are at numbers that companies who have been in market for years haven't been to. We have seen whether or not it's a sales opportunity, a specific sales opportunity that the games can deliver. So we think that the attentiveness that occurs when people are involved in watching and consuming the Olympic Games, that attentiveness, that awareness is what propels the effectiveness of their ads, which creates the success of what they're trying to accomplish. I mean, so it's a mass product, and we have found that it works for those who are looking to reach mass, and it has worked for those that are looking to reach B2B consumers.
So Frank, I think I saw Francisco Escobar's hand up. I don't know if it's still up or not, or if we should do the wrap up here.
It is up, and we can go ahead, Francisco.
Yeah, so this is really more for Paul Wilson. It appears to be, and I think that you all also support some of the Premier League and the other professional soccer leagues around the world, and with some of your products. That historically in the Olympics has not been a huge draw. Are you all putting a little bit more time and weight around the soccer games coming up? Since you have some decent pros playing in the Olympics now.
Yeah, well, Francisco, I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, Team USA soccer, men's soccer, has not performed well at all, and that's kind of affected us a little bit. On the flip side, Team USA women's soccer has done exceptionally well, with the exception of the Rio Games where they got knocked out very early. But we have seen what we're going to be doing in the Tokyo Games is we will be showcasing the gold medal soccer games in prime time, which we've never done before, to create more awareness of that. So you'll see the men's and women's soccer games in prime time on the network. Right now they're slated for the network. If Team USA women's get knocked out and they're not involved, then they're not quite sure whether or not that stays there, but we're not 100% sure there. So there's a lot of kind of promotion that we're doing there. If you think about one of the huge things that are important to us and is something that our marketing group has gotten behind is the entire See Her movement. And when you think about how the Olympics kind of create the heroes of young girls, it really is, that's the foundation of where a lot of these heroes are born. And Team USA, you'll start seeing it in the promotion about how we are promoting a lot of Team USA female athletes. And a lot of those female athletes are on Team USA soccer. So you're going to start seeing a lot of that awareness levels come up. We also know that because of the World Cup that's going to be right behind and our involvement with Premier League, that we're doing a lot of cross promoting between both to develop a higher awareness levels.
I wasn't aware that you were doing the See Her work. I'm very excited to hear that. When I was chair of the ANA and actually working with the chair who preceded me directly, Stephen Quinn, was at Walmart. Stephen was a great advocate for See Her, and it's a terrific program. And I think anything that can be done to give that more visibility is got a societal benefit in my opinion.
Yeah. NBC Sports is involved with a program called On Her Turf. It's our trademark female empowerment platform, and we do that pretty much every week of the year. So during the games, while See Her is kind of known as more awareness levels because so much of the work that the ANA has done to promote it. So we are incorporating the See Her and the On Her Turf together during the Olympic Games, and we're seeing a lot of interest on that platform.
Great. Well, Paul and Paul, you did a fabulous job here. Like the previous panel, we probably could have gone on for 2 or 3 hours. So thanks for staying long. And it's our fervent wish that the opening ceremonies really are, in fact, and symbolically, the kind of reopening of the world in a way that we're more used to. So best of luck with that. And we look forward to having you back again next year when you can share the results in terms of what you learned. Okay.
Thank you very much. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks for the time, everyone.
Thanks, guys.